Greetings. Welcome to a new episode of Art Matters with Wayne Quackenbush. I'm Wayne Quackenbush, your host, and also the president of the Portsmouth Arts Guild. Today we have two Massachusetts-based artists. The first artist we'll be talking to is Ryan Santos. I've known Ryan for, 6 years, maybe more. And our introduction was through Facebook. And I remember that I had done a drawing of a kid's toy 1950s style ray gun, maybe Buck Rogers or something. And it was inept in my own way. And Ryan introduced himself by showing him his wonderful oil painting of the same toy. And I was kind of impressed, and that was kind of a good way for us to meet. Now, over the years, he's participated in some of the art events I've hosted around the state of Rhode Island, and he's shown his artwork in my place in Newport. Now, Ryan, I know that you have a background in art school. You want to talk a little bit about how things progressed from you being a comic book kid to being a really refined oil painter?
Yeah, well, it started when I was a kid. Like forever, I was drawing, and art school came about just because I was in school. I went to local school. I went to UMass Dartmouth, and then I was in. I took some classes at BCC, but I transferred everything into New York City, and I went to the School of Visual Arts.
Right.
And comics were always in my blood since I was a kid. And that was just all I did was the pen and ink style, coloring with markers and all that kind of stuff to make it look like comics. And then in art school, I was kind of thinking that's my path, was going to be comic stuff.
Right.
And then I just kind of kept learning more and more, and then I found some great teachers that really focused on fine arts, and it was just like opened me up,
But that's kind of interesting because the School of Visual Arts is geared towards the commercial, and you went from something that was fairly commercial into something that was more, almost ethereal.
Yeah. Well, the school started as a comic book school. It was like an illustration.
That's right. I remember that.
Kind of just a comic book. That was the place to go. So they still have that base, that they
the
take it seriously.
Ham and egger, get the work out, get paid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why did you choose SVA as opposed to maybe the Kubert School?
Kubert School was very specialized, so it was just a little bit too far away, and it was a lot of money.
Yep.
When I applied to school, I really wanted to go to RISD.
Oh yeah.
So I went to RISD with my package.
Yeah,
I was accepted.
Yep.
And I had my financial package, like how much it would cost me and how much it would pay.
You would still be in debt today.
I would still be in debt today. And at the same time, with SVA, they gave me a really good deal. They were going to pay, they basically, half of my tuition was paid. So when because I really wanted to go to RISD, I brought all my financial work to them, and the lady at the financial office said, "You should probably go to New York." So I said, "Okay, that's it. See you later, guys."
Well,
so
if you had a choice between New York and Providence, and somebody gave you a better financial package, I think that was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. I'd still be paying for RISD right now.
Right. Yeah, I'm well aware of that. So, obviously, you had to find housing in RISD. At SVA. Did you live in the city, or did you? Where did you live?
Yeah,
initially?
we lived in Brooklyn. Because at the time I was already older, so I was already.
You say we? Were you were married by then? Wow,
I was already married. So because after I went to school, I worked a little bit, and I went to college part-time or here and there, and then my wife was still in school, so I kind of was working while she was in school, and then we actually bought a house and everything in Massachusetts, and then it was just like, well, I might as well just go to school. So we sold the house, moved to New York, and we had a little apartment in Brooklyn, and I commuted from there. So
Wow, that sounds like a daring adventure.
yeah, it was.
You want to start showing us some of your artwork, and we can talk about your influences and your techniques?
Sure,
And
sure. So
So
basically,
we don't just reminisce about New York and the good old days.
oh, the pizza. That's all I can think
I know, you can't get good pizza in Rhode Island. I forget I said that.
of. Even New Jersey is bad pizza.
I think they do that intentionally.
Yeah.
You know, I think you can blame The Sopranos for that. Anyway, so
So in school, when I went to school, I was focusing on, at the beginning it was like, I'm going to do comic stuff. I was going to do black and white, and like I was going to be, do comic stuff. And then it was all, when my mind exploded, it was like, oh, I got to do painting. Painting is what I really want to
when
do.
you saw what you could do with paint and what was
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah,
So-
it was
so-
never taught to me correctly, I feel, like in all the other schools. But then in SVA, it was just like, this is
Oh, it's all about technique, right?
Yeah.
And
So it was like really great, and it was easier than I thought it would be. It wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. So I really focused towards painting. So
well,
a lot of what
talk us through how you would do one of your oil paintings. I mean, there's so many different ways you could approach it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you could lay down a midground and pull out highlights. So bring up a piece and
right.
we'll,
So a good way to would be through portraiture is a good kind of way to see how it's done.
absolutely.
So this is a portrait that I did while in school. But it's done very traditionally. So it has a tonal underpainting.
Right.
It's all brown.
Right.
basically.
So yeah, that sets up your midground and you lay the color on top of that, right?
Right, and what it does is it helps you to just focus on drawing and not worrying about color.
Right.
So you have your tonal underpainting, and then you just add color on top. So you get nice darks, nice lights, and you get a really nice kind of traditional looking painting.
So when you're working with, say, your burnt sienna underpainting, is that like, do you mix a turpentine and make it a wash out of it?
No, what I do is I'll oil the canvas. I'll just put a little thin coat of oil on
Like
the whole
linseed
canvas.
oil or
Linseed
something
oil.
like
Yeah, a little thin coat of linseed oil to help it move around, and then I'll apply the paint with a palette knife, just the raw umber by itself.
That
no,
just blocks
I'll just
the
kind of block it
shapes
in,
out, you
right?
know.
And then I'll use either a rag or a brush or whatever, and I'll remove paint and add paint.
Yes.
So it's just the thickness of the paint to get your tone.
Yeah, it's
Right.
almost like making a sculpture too. I mean, if you get it to the right consistency.
Right, a little
You're
bit.
building it up.
Yeah, so it's that tonal underpainting helps you just focus on
And
drawing.
so you let that dry before
Yeah.
you move on?
Yep.
Okay.
You let that totally dry.
Yep.
And then what you do is you block in your basic color, and then you just, from there, it's just a bunch of steps.
Now, would you be working from dark to light, or can you mix it up in any way?
I generally try to be as accurate as you can right away.
Uh-huh.
So when you're doing your drawing, you're already setting up yourself with your lights and your darks.
Right.
So you're not having a dark ground and building the light on top.
Right.
You're not going the other way where you start light and putting in
Right.
your darks. What I try to do is to kind of nail it right away. And like build up, just your highlights can be built up a little extra on top of that because of that tonal underpainting. You can't get kind of pure white.
Right.
But it's basically, you just want to block things in at what tone you need them to be as soon as you can, rather than trying to dig it out of that hole of darkness.
Now, would you be mixing colors to get a skin tone? What
yeah.
colors would you be using?
For the skin tones, they're usually, there's a combination of colors. It's usually, I use usually like a sienna, raw umber, some red, usually like Terra Rosa is a nice red to use for skin tone. Yellow ochre is always white, so it's
Yeah.
usually, it's in that kind of range. And
Yeah,
then
but-
with this technique, there's a lot of layering. So you could do thin layers of skin tone. So like if you have it all kind of generally done, each time you come back in a new layer, you can kind of do it like makeup. You can add it, like the red in the nose or the red in the cheeks can be kind of just like a thin little touch of color on
So
top.
are you using sable brushes to get that? I mean, the brush strokes at least from this far away, are imperceptible.
Yeah, that comes both as a product of the layering process and using good brushes.
Right.
Something like this, the brushwork is kind of hidden, it's kind of soft.
Yeah.
You know, it's not kind of not a modern look where it's heavy, thick brush strokes. That, you know, that's another kind of style or a kind of way to do. You could do the same process, but you just end on that kind of heavier.
Yes, some people
layer
want
paint.
their hand to be felt when they're doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
classical portraiture, you kind of remove yourself and try to be as accurate as possible, not photographically accurate, but accurate to the subject. And
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to move so we can show more artwork. So, because we're
Sure,
already
sure.
getting close on
Yeah.
time.
So something that's a little more loose was when I came back to school, after I left school, I came back to Massachusetts, and everyone's like, "Oh, you got to do boats and you got to do seagulls."
Bring it up.
So this one was one I did kind of when I came back. It's a mix of collage, so it's a collage base, and then I oil painted on top. So you can see there's like a texture and like some visual elements in there that come from the collage, but it's mostly the painting that shows through.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you can see hints of what you put underneath.
Yeah,
So next,
that's a fun one. So again, I've been going along with the. These are some of my more local landscapes.
now make sure that the camera can see that. Yeah,
All right. So this is New Bedford Harbor.
in the winter time.
In the wintertime, some snow. But these are kind of some of the works that I've been working on lately. Very traditional kind of. This is a lot looser than the portrait.
Yeah.
I can't get my mind to make every little wave and every little thing.
No,
I
but
like to have a looser kind of
You
hand to it.
definitely have the feel of it. I mean, it looks like you lovingly rendered the clouds, for instance. Like, clouds are so awesome to paint and draw. It's
Yeah.
like you can see that you have lots of work in there.
Yeah, it's you know, I try to get a little fun in there, a little bit of my hand, like you said before, more so than the earlier
Now,
portraits.
do you do plein air, or do you work out off of photos? Or?
Mostly from photographs.
Yep.
I've done plein air kind of as reference sometimes for color or lighting and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it's usually a combination of both of those things.
Let's see some of your prints. We're down to like our last minute, believe it or not. This went by so
Okay.
fast.
Yeah. So I bringing it back to some of the comic work. This was a large scale painting I did as a commission. So it's Batman and Robin and the whole thing.
Is that the one in my place in Newport now? Or is that another version of that?
Oh, yeah, that's the one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So this print was actually Adam West bought one of these
Oh,
prints
nice.
from me.
Right.
And he signed one for me too.
So I think we have time for one or two real quick ones.
All right, so I've been doing these watercolors lately that people really enjoy.
Oh, my goodness.
So this is
That looks like gouache.
yeah, no, this was a commission of the Batmobile. So someone said, "Oh, can you do the Batmobile?" I have a Batmobile collection. So I said, "Sure, I'll do the Batmobile." So I did this one. It's a mix of watercolor, some Copic marker.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
But the original was a little bit larger than this. Yeah, and then after that one, people have been saying,
That's
you
about all we have time for. So
Oh, that's
I
fine.
want to thank you very much, Ryan. It's been, wow, this went by so fast. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Hi. Well, now we have our second Massachusetts-based artist of the show, and I'd like to introduce everybody to Jill Law. I've known Jill for a number of years. She actually predates my connection with the Portsmouth Arts Guild. I think you said that you started working with them about 2007, but you have connections all over the area with different artist groups. And I kind of just learned about your history and how you have kind of eased into the role you have now. You want to tell us a little bit about your multiple careers?
Oh, well, I started out as a teenager in restaurants, as many teenagers do, and eventually ended up in the kitchen. And from there, it just ballooned into becoming the chef at some point. And that was many years ago. And I did that until 1997. In 94, I started at RISD in the continuing ed program for interior design. Was delighted by that and just enveloped it, but still stayed on as the chef until I graduated. And then went out on my own as an interior designer. Been self-employed since 97.
So how do you make the connections to go from job to job? I mean, you obviously have a reputation by now, having done it for more than 20 years, but how did you get started doing something like that?
I worked for a designer, or with a designer in Providence for about 5 years before I completely went on my own.
So that was kind of like an apprenticeship.
It was. It
Yeah.
made a lot of connections
Yep.
with contractors and design centers and things like that before going on my own, and got a lot of referrals from the work I had done with that other person.
And so you do everything I would imagine that an interior designer does. And
Yes, a lot of it is based towards the architectural end of it versus the pick and a paint color. But
so the actual structural changes in a house
yeah,
or
working
building?
with the architects or helping the client see what's reality and what's fantasy is a big thing.
Right, and that usually has to do with not only the physics of building, but also the financial aspects of
Absolutely.
things. Yeah.
Big guys, small budget sometimes.
But I know you as a painter, so I know that you were stating that there was something about you described it as the dirty laundry syndrome.
Well, first I have to say, when I was in high school, I went to high school so I could go to art class. That was the reason for going.
Yeah.
And that always stuck in my mind for the 20-some years that I was in the restaurant business. And then when I did get to start as a designer, and 10 years or so into it, I realized that I needed another outlet to express my creativity. And I didn't have to walk through messy rooms or be governed by budgets and constraints of construction or anything like that. And it was freedom.
Yeah.
It was a release. So I went back to RISD and started taking painting classes.
And you were describing that as a kind of an open studio situation, so you got to work side by side with people who were realists and people who were abstracts. What led you in the direction that I know you from, where most of what you do is abstract?
Almost all of what I do is abstract. I do some realistic painting, very rarely. I continue to try to educate myself. I've taken pastel classes for the first time this spring and summer, and that's eye-awakening. And then I also took a plein air class painting for the first time this summer, which was fantastic. Obviously, that's a little more tight than what I normally do.
Well, plein air can get pretty abstract too.
It can, yes.
Yeah. You want to start showing some of your work
Sure.
and talking about what your influences might have been when you're creating? I know that I see some of that there's some pouring stuff and just...
The pouring stuff is fairly recent.
Yeah.
I actually had seen somebody's artwork, another local artist, who had done a pastel, and it looked like it had a lot of cells in it, or very organic.
Yes.
So I Googled cells in a painting, and I came up with dirty pours. So I
Okay.
went on and on with it until I had enough knowledge to try it. And I've done about 40 of dirty pours now.
I'm not familiar with the term dirty pours.
A dirty pour is called a dirty pour because you mix the paints prior to pouring them. So you may have 5 colors that have been thinned out with a medium that makes them
would be
pourable.
your palette. Right?
Yes. And then you layer those in 4 new cups and give it a swirl, and then you do the pouring. You actually do a flip. You have a cardboard or a plywood piece, you put the cups on top of the plywood, put the canvas on top of that, and then flip it over and let the 4 cups. So you could see on this particular painting, there are 4 little areas where white
Oh.
separates them. So, they
So
were
the paints separate themselves?
they do.
You got to hold that vertically so we can,
Oh, I'm sorry.
they can see it at home.
Yes, and you add the white, which does not have silicone in it or dimethicone, which the colors have. And that's like the oil and vinegar or the salad dressing, where the oil comes to the top.
So what kind of medium do you
It's acrylic.
mix to make the paints repel from each other?
It's the silicone or the dimethicone that does
And
it.
that's in the medium.
It's a separate ingredient. It's considered treadmill lubricant or white lightning, a lubricant that you would use.
Yeah, so it's an oil.
Yes, and
Well,
it's added.
not exactly an oil, but silicone-based substance.
And so once that's on there,
So it's
it
kind of
starts
a-
to come to the top of the layer of paint, and then you use a torch to go over to even progress that further by
Wow, this
heating
is
it.
like an incredible lesson just from this one painting.
Well, it's fun, and I did have a workshop at the Dartmouth Cultural Center where I have had up to 10 students and as few as 5 students. And they all say, "Oh, good, I can do it. I'm not an artist." And I say, "Yes, you can."
Well, I've seen these paintings that people have done, and everybody has a different, in fact, it's amazing the range that you can get from these things. I mean, I have a friend that you probably know who makes these incredible large scenes that look like, I mean, he's very good at faking waves coming in, and it's almost like he's doing a seascape, but it's using that technique, the pouring technique. And to me, it always looked like, I don't know if you're familiar with old end papers from books where they marbleized it. So the marbleizing, you would actually pour stuff onto water
Right.
and then drop
The
whatever.
sheet on there, right?
Yep, and then bring that up, and you'd have that kind of effect. So, but this is all broken up into quadrants, it seems. It's 4 different,
I've done it without breaking into quadrants too. I
Yeah.
just don't have that with me.
I get you, yeah, okay.
And then I also have the painting photographed and printed on fabric, and then I created these pillows,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
which you can see each one of them line up somehow with this.
Right,
And that's fun too. And I think people get silly over it, but it's a good thing and
boy,
fun.
if only they had that back in the hippie days, huh?
I know. So that's dirty pouring.
That's very cool. All right, so,
And I'm also started for the first time this year working with cold wax, which is oil-based or used with oil. It's not heated like
I get it, an encaustic,
right. It's
right.
used with a palette knife and mixed with the paint. And this is a recent painting with that type of technique. Mostly, a lot of my work is palette knife and
Yeah,
brush, but mostly palette knife. So that's the
I like a
cold
palette
wax.
knife because it doesn't let you get too noodly, you know, you have to be much more direct with what's going on.
This is more an attempt to have an encaustic look where it has acrylic medium over it to give it the feel of wax and the carving into it of an encaustic might have.
It looks like you have some kind of writing in there.
Some script, yeah.
Okay,
Not anything specific, but just to give the impression that you could possibly read
so you're
something.
not like channeling something or speaking in tongues or...
Not that I'm aware of. It could happen though,
So
Wayne.
you have an underpainting with this, and then you're
Yes,
putting... Oh,
absolutely.
So is the writing like digging down into the...
into the medium.
Nothing like getting physical with the
Yep.
canvas. That's awesome.
And then this is another avenue that I go down, which is a resin top to the painting. So and it's acrylic painting, and then 2-part epoxy resin is poured over it, and it gives you that glass-like look to it, and lots of depth and reflection. So that's another choice. This is a similar technique, lots of layering and washing and spraying off the paint before the resin went on there.
Are you getting a good light on that one? Yeah. Okay.
The darker the colors, the more reflective. It's hard to photograph, yeah.
So what, you have like pearlescent tones in there.
Yeah, I have some interference paint in there, right out of the bottle, just flung on there,
Okay.
fluid paint.
So explain the term interference paint.
Interference paint is as you as you physically move along the painting, it changes color.
Oh.
I can't do that here because it's going to reflect just the light
Oh,
off
I
the
see.
resin.
But is
But
that in the paint itself?
Yes, golden
Okay.
makes an interference paint.
I've never
many
heard
colors.
that term either. Wow,
Yeah.
I'm learning so much today.
And then this one is also fairly recent, and it was a painting that hung around for a long, long time, actually semi-landscape,
Yep.
and I didn't like it at all, so I said it has to go. And I try to get inspired by watching other artists and see how they do things, and so I said, let's make some marks on it and let's just change everything. It has a silver leaf base to it, and then everything else is painted over it. So it's a painting twice.
So,
But-
silver leaf base, would that be a complete undercoat?
It was. Yeah, the whole canvas was silver leafed.
That sounds expensive.
Well, it's actually imitation silver leaf.
Oh, I
It's
got you.
aluminum leaf. It's
Aluminum.
I think it's $100 and something for 500 sheets.
Oh,
whereas
right.
you couldn't get 50
So how do you
sheets.
apply the sheets to the canvas?
Typically, I would use a matte varnish, acrylic varnish,
Okay, so
watered
you
down.
basically, it's almost like decoupaging them down. Okay.
Put those down and then varnish them again so they're a little durable, and then paint on them. And lots of marks, lots of motion and freedom.
So seeing parallel lines that look like maybe corrugated cardboard.
Absolutely, correct.
Ah,
Winner.
good eye, good eye.
Yep.
And then like the rings are from some sort of can
Plastic
or-
container, dipped in the paint
Yep,
and
yep.
pressed on there. And I use paint movers or paint markers, that shapers. They're like a paintbrush, but it's vinyl, and you can push the paint.
Okay, yeah, almost like a palette knife, kind of in between a palette knife and a
but
brush.
soft. Yep, so you
Yeah.
can really push and move the paint around. So you see a lot of little marks on
Yeah,
there from
I
that.
can see your hand in a lot of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And isn't it just great to fling paint?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
such
just so
it's
much
a
fun.
release, and it's fun, and it's unexpected.
As opposed to being meticulous and careful and making sure you stay within the lines.
So true.
You have a couple of big paintings.
I do. The one on the square one was done at the Boston Design Center. They had a week. They have Market Week, and they invited some artists up there to work in the showroom, in a vacant showroom, and that's the painting that I did there for 3 or 4 days of painting publicly, as designers and customers walked around.
So people got to watch you work?
They did, yes.
Yeah.
There
Now, do
was
you ever do any teaching, or are you just, are you
I do
more-
teach. I teach at the Dartmouth Cultural Center.
Right.
Yep.
I know that's one of the organizations you're involved with, and
And
also the
yeah.
South County,
South Coast Artist,
West Coast.
currently
yes.
the president.
Not South County, that's someplace else.
That is someplace else. And currently the president of the Dartmouth Cultural Center.
Right, yeah. And we have one more left?
That painting has had success to some degree in the fact that it was juried into the Newport Art Show, members show last year.
Oh, nice.
And prior to that, or after that, it was at the New Bedford Art Museum,
Oh,
juried
very
in.
cool.
So it's been juried into 2 shows. It's still looking for a home. But it's successful, yes.
Well, that kind of reaches the end of our talk. I'm really glad you came. I mean, it's been completely illuminating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Very good.
The natives are restless, they brandish in the spear and Jacksons. Their primitive chants are thinly disguised as national anthems. Things are getting slightly less